Hello, BookTube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. Been working on 4 books this week. Ozma of Oz and the Complete Stories of Oz. The Hobbit. The Grammar Book. And the Histories by Herodotus. And just barely started Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings. So let's go through some of these quickly. The Hobbit I finished yesterday and reviewed on this channel yesterday. Apologies, that wasn't my best review. I don't know. I turned on the camera right after I had, very shortly after I had finished the book. So I was still gathering my thoughts as I spoke. And I think, to be frank, I was a little bit tired last night when I turned on the camera. It been a busy couple days. But the philosophy of this channel is to just, when you finish a book, just film the review. Because there's no sense waiting around till the ideal time. I just try and keep plowing on through, and some of the reviews will be good and some of them will not be good. So anyways, apologies for a less than stellar review of The Hobbit, but I quite enjoyed this book. And I've just barely started the Fellowship of the Rings here, Fellowship of the Ring, the first book in the Lord of the Ring. And I'm on the first part here, note on the text. So, yeah, interesting that there's so much history with the textual printing of the Lord of the Rings books. This is something I did not expect. I mean, you expect it with, like, Shakespeare, right? Where, it was before things were standardized and there were a lot of different copies or portfolios circulating around. So now there are different versions of the text. Or, you expect these kind of textual questions with the Bible. But, this book was just published in the 1950s. How could there be that many textual problems with it already? But it turns out, for a number of reasons, publishers making mistakes, publishers correcting correcting words that Tolkien had wanted spelled a certain way and was erroneously corrected, different editions coming out, and then there's talking about resetting the text, resetting the printing. So some of this explanation is a little bit lost on me without knowledge of exactly how these printing presses work, as I suspect it would be lost on the average reader. But I guess when they do editions, they reset the text, whatever that means. How do these printers work? Do they have like those little movable type blocks that they have to move around, like, give me an E? I'm sure they don't do that nowadays, right? Nowadays, it's got to be all done by computer. But in the 1950s, is that how they did it? And if so, boy, what an enormous effort that would have taken to print out a book like this, huh? So just barely started this book. Just reading through the notes on the textual problems and the textual discrepancies between various editions of The Lord of the Rings. Okay, then finished off Ozma of Oz, book 3 in the Complete Stories of Oz, which Dane Reeds and I are doing as a buddy read. I just actually saw that he's published his video review of that. I probably should have watched it before I filmed this video, but another rule of this channel is you just have to film when you can, because we've got a 2-year-old daughter running around the house, and I just grab those free moments to film stuff when it's a little bit quiet in the house. But anyways, I have already filmed my review of this, Ozma of Oz. I'm going to post it tomorrow to keep with the rough schedule Dane and I worked out, which is posting our reviews every 2 weeks on the Monday. So every other Monday. And I'm not going to talk about it here. So, the grammar book. As usual, I made very little progress on the grammar book this week. I was very busy with work and other stuff for professional development. So I was doing a lot of professional development work this week, but unfortunately not a lot of reading. So I only covered 4 pages of this book, which is still on chapter 11, still talking about yes/no questions, and down to the teaching suggestions. Now, this book, I've been finding it very useful on the whole, very readable on the whole, very relatively interesting on the whole. They get more into the nitty-gritty of grammar than most books published for ESL teachers. So there's some meat to chew on in each chapter, which is good. But I don't know about the teaching suggestions. The teaching suggestions at the end of every unit just seem very boring. So, like, I guess they seem to mostly assume a group of highly motivated adult students, which is so much different than my world of teaching demotivated teenage students. It's like, okay, put this up on the board and explain this, and I think to myself, oh, geez, I'm going to put this up on the board and start to explain it, and they're all going to be checking Facebook on their phones or something. And to be fair, this book was published, I don't know, many years ago, 1999. So before smartphones were distracting all the students. But I find the teaching suggestions unappealing. Not terribly useful. And it's talking about yes/no questions, which is a relatively simple point. Although, as always in this book, they do a good job of getting into the nitty-gritty and getting into like the sticky little points about the technicalities of the grammar, which is good. But then we go back to the teaching suggestions, and they've got these suggestions here for how to rearrange cards. Sorry, I'm not sure if this is going to show up on the camera or not. Quite often this camera shows it in mirror image. But it's showing how you would move these cards around on the whiteboard. Nowadays, maybe this might be done on PowerPoint or something. Actually, nowadays, I'm sure I would do this on PowerPoint or Google Slides. And talking about how John eats the apple is replaced by do, and then you add the S, and then you replace the do plus S with does, D-O-E-S. So immediately replace do S with a new card does, explaining that rewriting do plus third person singular present as does is a convention in English. So a student who's at a level yet where they can't make yes/no questions in English is, I think, an absolute beginner, right? Certainly nowadays it would be an absolute beginner. And I think nowadays, certainly in my context, in metropolitan areas in Asia, it's very rare to find anybody who doesn't have that sort of basic knowledge. I shouldn't say that. I'm sure if you went out to like the market or the urban laborers, the English level probably would be an absolute beginner. In my context, working in the educational systems, by the time the students get to me, they always have a little bit of knowledge. But anyways, how is a student who doesn't know how to form a yes/no question going to follow the argument that replacing do plus S with a new card does is a convention in English? Actually, having raised that question, I can think of ways you can get around with it. Not using the word convention, certainly, and just showing them the cards and being like, see? But it's certainly, That's certainly not in the text as it's written here. Uh, yeah, the the teaching suggestions I don't find terribly helpful, but I read through them anyways. And then, as with happened last time, I got up to the exercise here, and I just got stuck on this because a lot of my reading is done in little bits and pieces. 5 minutes here and during the break, a little bit here while I'm eating breakfast, and to get out the pen and paper and sit down and work through these exercises is requires almost scheduling that reading time, which I don't really have a lot of these days. So I always get hung up on the end of the chapters with the exercises. I don't know, maybe I should just start skipping the exercises because it seems to be more of an impediment to getting me through this book than anything. But in theory, I do like working through the sentence tree maps. That I don't know what I've gotten out of it. It feels like it's good consolidation of the grammar. So that will be my goal for this week, to work through these exercises, the sentence tree maps, and then get on to the next chapter. So that leaves us with Herodotus. So this week with Herodotus, I read, what did I get through? 28 pages. From page 286 to page 314. So it's not terrible. I'm for most people on BookTube that would be considered terrible, but for me, 28 pages isn't terrible. I'm a slow reader, but my progress has definitely slowed down with Herodotus, and that's I think a direct result of having picked up these other books, because I'm about now at my limit for the amount of books to be read simultaneously, and especially because I've been enjoying these books so much. I've been picking these up more, and then picking up Herodotus less, and then Herodotus, of course, I'm keeping track of the endnotes here and a fair amount of flicking back to the maps. But that being said, there is always a lot in here that's very interesting. It requires some cross-referencing with the maps and with the index, and occasionally with Wikipedia. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's interesting. He's talking about the Scythian customs. So the Scythians are a horse people who live... Where do they live? Above the Euxine Sea, what would that be in modern day terms? They live in this area here. And again, apologies, this map might be shown in reverse image. I don't know what that is. Is that the Ukraine nowadays? Kind of, yeah, north of Greece and Turkey. So there are these wild nomad horse type people who, ride horses and shoot bows and arrows. And Herodotus is going into their customs and the geography, which makes me flip back and forth between the maps. And he talks about this character. What was his name? He gets mentioned a couple times here. Hopefully I'm pronouncing this right. Anacharsis, the Scythian. And Tom Holland makes a note, one of the endnotes here. He says, Anacharsis is a well-known figure, although Herodotus's Philhellene portrayal of him is not how he's usually portrayed. And that's all Tom Holland gives us. It's one of the rare times when I would have liked a little bit more from Tom Holland in those endnotes. My general impression is that the endnotes are very helpful and pop up frequently, but something like that, I don't know, maybe it would have been more interesting to go more into the background of Anacharsis, or it would be more helpful to include that in the endnotes. I don't know how much you can assume that the reader would have known it. I didn't know it. But we do have Wikipedia nowadays. Now it's a little bit of a bother to, put the book down, walk over to my computer, open up my computer, get connected to the internet. My computer has this, whenever it's been shut down and whenever I open it up again, it takes like 3 minutes to secure the connection to the internet. I don't know, it's annoying. And then get on Wikipedia and then look it up. And then also, once I'm on the computer, then I'm like, well, okay, I'll just check Facebook or check my mail or what's on YouTube. It's dangerous to get on the computer. And so from that perspective, if the reading were more self-contained, it would be better for getting more reading done, because I get distracted by the computer. But you can look all the stuff up on Wikipedia, obviously. And Anacharsis was, I guess, a Scythian philosopher. So, he was a wild barbarian who was living out with these horse people. And I guess he came down to Greece and taught his philosophy. He had some sort of barbarian philosophy that he had cultivated out there, or learned philosophy from the Greeks and developed his own. I'm not entirely sure. And some of the stuff that have purported to be his writings or some of his teachings, I think, have survived down to us. It's questionable whether or not he was a real person or whether he was legendary. But those little types of things, which are always popping up throughout Herodotus, make this really fascinating reading, even though I'm going through it very slowly. Every time I sit down to read it, I'm always like, oh, that was interesting. I'm glad I learned that. Who knows how long this will stick in my long-term memory, any of it. I could completely have forgotten it in 5 years. But it talks about how Anacharsis had gone back to Scythia, and then he was killed by one of the Scythian kings because he was using Greek customs. Scythians really hate Greek customs. It talks about another king of theirs who got overthrown because he was in the cult of Bacchus, or Dionysus, Greek god. Dionysus and Bacchus are the same, right? I don't remember, actually. Then other things that are really interesting. It talks. So in the Scythian lands, there are all these different types of barbarians, and it talks about another one of them. They're called the Getans, who believe themselves to be immortal. And I thought, well, how could they possibly believe themselves to be immortal? I mean, certainly they must see people in their tribe getting old and dying. But it turns out what they really believe is that the distinguishing feature of their belief and their own immortality is their conviction that at the point of death, they do not actually die, but go to Celce-Murcia, a divine spirit who is also known by some of them as Gabelias. I don't know. So they believe in the immortality of the soul, essentially, that after they die, that they're going to go to this divine spirit. So, yeah, that's interesting because it seems to presage Christianity. Although, I don't know, somebody correct me on this, maybe. The Greeks also believed in the immortality of the soul, right? I mean, they believe that after you die, you go to Hades. And apparently, I think, according to my knowledge of Greek mythology, Hades was not a wonderful paradise like heaven is. I think what in the Odyssey, one of the characters says that it's better to be alive on Earth than to be the king down here in Hades. It's just a miserable place, I think. But they did go to Hades, right? So there was some sort of spirit or essence that went down there. So Herodotus is talking about that like this strange belief that they believe that their spirits go to Celce-Murcia. Or actually, sorry, maybe I'm reading that wrong. Their conviction that at the point of death, they do not actually die but go to Celce-Murcia. So maybe it's not their spirit, maybe it's their body. And then maybe, maybe it's an illusion that their body is dying. I don't know. But then it talks about the strange custom they have of every 5 years sending off a messenger to Celce-Murcia, which is taking a messenger and throwing him up on the spears. So he falls down on the spears, and then he takes their messages to Celce-Murcia. They have him memorize the messages before they throw him on the spears. And they say if he lands on the spears but he doesn't die, then that shows he's like a wicked man. And so they what do? They patch him up again and tell him how wicked he is or something like that. And then they choose, Should he survive, however, then they hold the messenger himself responsible, charging him with being a man of low moral character. And once they have pinned the blame on him, they send another man as a messenger. It doesn't say what happens to the original guy. I guess he goes on living, albeit a little bit more, what's the word? Injured than before. A little bit more beat up than before. But then it goes back and says that the Greeks who live beside the Hellespont and the Euxine Sea have informed me that Celce-Murcia was this divine spirit they believe in, was in fact a human being, a slave on Samos, where his master was Pythagoras. Now, Pythagoras, the famous mathematician. Now, Tom Holland, in his notes, I think, says that there might be a little bit of an anachronism going on. Or no, where is that? Am I remembering wrong? Maybe I'm remembering that wrong. Okay. So he was a slave of Pythagoras, and he got his freedom, and he came back to his homeland with all these riches and with all this knowledge of advanced mathematics and science that he learned from the Greeks, and so impressed these savage people that he had come from that they thought him a god. And then he built a huge underground lair for himself. And then once it was fully furnished, he vanished from the sight of the Thracians and went down into his lair, where he lived for 3 years. The Thracians duly missed him and mourned him as though he were dead. 3 years on, however, Celce-Murcia appeared back before their gaze, thereby confirming everything that he had said. Sorry, the thing that he had said, I skipped over that. They're having this big feast, they're drinking all this wine, and he told them that he would never die, but instead go to a place where they would exist forevermore and enjoy every kind of blessing. So that is obviously like the Christian idea of heaven, right? And quite different from the Greek view of Hades. And the idea that after he made this promise, and he goes into this underground lair for 3 years, stays there, and then comes back up and says, see guys, I told you, I'm not dead, I'm coming back from heaven. I mean, like all of Herodotus' stories, it's somewhat unbelievable because the guy's not going to hang out underground for 3 years just for the sake of throwing off this trick, right? I mean, that's really being dedicated to the joke there, huh? But I mean, obviously, I'm sure you're thinking the same thing I am, which is that sounds like the Christian myth, right? Jesus is in the cave for 3 days. What's this guy's name? Celce-Murcia? Celce-Murcia is in the underground lair for 3 years, something magical about the number 3, and then promises his followers that they're going to go to this land after they die where they get every kind of good thing. I mean, I'm not sure really what that proves or if it proves anything, but I'm an agnostic myself, but I don't believe this idea of the Jesus myth. I mean, I don't believe that that Jesus never even existed and he was just invented by the Romans. I think like Bart Ehrman does, that Jesus died and then his followers had some sort of post-traumatic stress event where they believed that they saw some sort of phantom. But yeah, interesting. I mean, interesting interesting the parallels here, for whatever that's worth. So then also talks about another of the Scythian people who mingled with the Amazons. And this is another interesting story that pops up a few pages later. So I guess the Greeks fought a war with the Amazons. And it's mentioned, where is it mentioned here? Oh yeah. The story is told of the Sarmatians, set during the war between the Greeks and the Amazons. And it's said like that, the war between the Greeks and the Amazons. Now, maybe I should look this up on Wikipedia, but I don't remember what that is. The war between the Greeks and the Amazons. Was there a famous war between the Greeks and the Amazons? I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with Greek mythology. I remember the story of the Amazons in the siege of Troy. Or maybe that's what it's referring to. Maybe when the Amazons came and fought at Troy. And of course there was Hercules and the Amazons and Theseus and the Amazons. But was there like a general war between the Greeks and the Amazons? Maybe it was already in the earlier part of Herodotus and I just forgot. I don't remember. But anyways, after the Greeks' victory, they're taking the Amazons away on their ships as captives. And then when they're out in the middle of the sea, the Amazons get free and hack the Greeks down. Dangerous to try and take Amazon women as your slaves. But the Amazons don't know how to pilot a ship. They've never had any experience of being on ships. So they land in this land of the Scythians, and they're running around, being Amazons, plundering from the Scythians. They see some horses, they jump on the horses, and then they're running around plundering. And the Scythians have no idea what Amazons are because they've never encountered them before. So they think that these are just young men in their first flush of youth. But then I guess one of the Amazons is killed in the battle, and then they realize that these are in fact women afterwards. So they decide that these women would be really useful for bearing children. Doesn't say exactly why, but I think the implication is that there must be some really good genes going on in these Amazon women. Amazonian refers to people who live in the Amazon rainforest, right? That wouldn't be what you would call an Amazon from mythology, I think. So they send out some of the younger warriors to make friends with the Amazon women. And there's this whole story about this courtship and how they eventually go off and found a new people. Tom Holland, in his footnotes, said this is obviously mythology. But there is apparently some archaeological evidence that these peoples who they're talking about, who have sort of a mix of Greek and Scythian culture and language, apparently archaeological evidence backs up the fact that they were descended from some sort of coupling between Greeks and Scythians, not Amazons necessarily. But yeah, it talks about, I mean, the punchline of the story, after the Amazons and their new husband go off to found a new settlement, is that's why their language is so different than the other Scythians, because they learn this mixture of Amazonian. I guess the Amazons spoke Greek, so mixture of Greek and Scythian. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough. I tried to stop these videos at 30 minutes in. I haven't even gotten to a quarter of the interesting stuff that was in the Herodotus from this week. But yeah, that's the way this book goes. It's a lot of cross-referencing stuff with the back or with the maps or with Wikipedia occasionally, but a lot of very interesting stuff in here if you put in the time. So I am glad I'm reading this. Okay, that's all for this week.